What's up, everybody? Matt Gajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. Today, we're talking College Football DFS, the Week 11 main slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by PrizePicks, and if you've never heard of PrizePicks, they're daily prop-based offerings. You're making lineups of player props. They've got college football where you can play overs, unders on yards, touchdowns, you name it. They also have NBA, NFL, MLB, you name it, they have it. You can do these across sports where you mix maybe an NBA prop with a college football prop in the same lineup. If you do 5, you can 10x your entry fee. And they have a great deal for you guys. If you click the link in the video description below and make your first deposit, you'll get a match deposit bonus up to $100 and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So check out PrizePicks. All right, we've got 14 games. We're going to dive into it right now. No time to waste. Up at the top is your data for each of these matchups. If you have questions, leave a comment or hit me up on Twitter at Matt_Kajeski. But we've been through this. We'll kick things off with the most lopsided game on the slate. Indiana, Ohio State, 40.5 point spread. Yes, 4-0. Indiana has a 9-point implied team total. Simple as this. Don't play anyone at Indiana unless you're just full stacking Ohio State and you need a cheap run back. Basilick's probably going to start this game after he got hurt last week. He's awful, negative 145 rushing yards, averages 262 as a passer. They should pay you to roster him. 3-way backfield committee, unless there's a major injury, not worthwhile. Receiver, their best player on the entire team, Cam Camper tore his ACL. Can't play him, obviously. Do they have anybody cheap? Not really. Emery Simmons, DJ Matthews, Anderson Kobe, they're all too expensive to play here. Unless this is the only way I'll play an Indiana guy. I'm running some massive Ohio State stack, and I need an Indiana guy to keep it competitive because let's go to Ohio State. If you are going to stack this offense, this game needs to be closer than the 40-point spread for you to reach a ceiling. It just needs to. Otherwise, their starters are going to be out by halftime, the third quarter. I don't know. So if you want a full Ohio State stack, I really believe an Indiana player needs to keep this semi-competitive, and I don't know who it's going to be, and I don't think it's very likely. Indiana is first in pace, and they pass the ball 64% of the time, which gives you volume, but it doesn't give you efficiency. This is a bad team. For Ohio State, CJ Stroud's too expensive for not only his role, but for this game environment. He only has 75 rushing yards in the year, so he doesn't run. He's only averaging 272 pass yards, 27.5 attempts. This is maybe the worst game environment you could draw up for him. He should not be more expensive than like Tanner Mordecai. It's just flat out true. He's playable in tournaments because the ceiling's enormous. On their way to playing to this spread, he could have 5 touchdowns. But just know he's not a good price-adjusted play. He's a great play in a vacuum, but at 9,500, you could just flat out do better. Same thing goes for all his pass catcher. These are elite GPP options because if this plays to the spread and they get up by 40 points, like if one of them catches 3 touchdowns, they're going to be GPP viable, but it's volatile. Like this is a really volatile offense. I hate when these games are on the slate because you're not only trying to guess like, okay, does it play to the spread, but how much do these guys play? Like, does Marvin Harrison play 50% of his role or does he play 85? Because at 85, I want to play Marvin Harrison, but if he's at 45% and then they decide to rest their guys, like I don't want to play him at that price. These games are awful when they're on the main slate, but to rank the receivers, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka are the top 2. Julian Fleming is 3rd. Cade Stover is your tight end. He's a distant 4th. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba's out. All the other, like they're going to play some ancillary receivers. I don't know who they are or what degree they play, but we'll find out, I guess. In the backfield, Trevion Henderson's hurt. He missed their last game. I wouldn't expect to see him much, if at all. Wouldn't expect to see Mayan Williams carry the ball 26 times either. He's been hurt recently. Their second most recent game, he left after 2 carries. They're also not using Dallin Hayden as the third back anymore either. They moved Chip Trayanum back from linebacker to running back. So when they do use an ancillary back, it's a player not in the player pool. So, yeah. Sorry way to start with this game, guys. Clearly, I'm not very fond of it. I wish they would just leave these games off the slate and give us more competitive ones. Or just one fewer game would be nice too, DraftKings. Just some thoughts. But we're immediately going to go to better games. We've got Missouri, Tennessee. This has a 57 total, 20.5 point spread in favor of Tennessee. They're looking for a bounce back here after their loss to Georgia. Missouri's been playing well quietly of late, and they're taking money in this game. I don't think this gets through any more key numbers or anything, but Missouri is taking money here. Missouri ranks 92nd in pace. They have a 44% pass rate, and Brady Cook is mobile. I think the team total here leaves quite a bit to be desired, but 5,600, a guy that has 232 rush yards. He's more of like your decent floor, low ceiling option because he's only averaging 200 pass yards per game. And when you stack him, it's either Dominic Lovett, Luther Burden. They've actually used Bear Bannister a fair amount recently, but these guys have been banged up. They've dealt with some injuries. Just know that nobody on the team averages more than 6.4 targets per game. That's Lovett at 5K. He's easily the most efficient. I don't think you need to go here, I guess, unless, again, you're trying to just find a run back for a Tennessee stack. Then it's probably Lovett or Burden. In the run game, Cody Schrader is interesting. 4,500 for him. This is a theme we've seen for multiple weeks now. They're trying to trim the fat in their offense. They're trying to get rid of players that are inefficient. One of them is Nathaniel Pete. So Cody Schrader is now receiving a monstrous workload. He has touch counts of 25 and 26 in back-to-back games. Tennessee plays solid defense, but this is more of your, all right, I'm going to pay down for, and if like a locked-in touch guy in Cody Schrader, and pay up elsewhere. So he's the lone piece I feel somewhat comfortable with on this team. Otherwise, I think it's pretty risky for Missouri pass catchers. And normally we're talking routes and stuff. I don't even know if it's worthwhile for teams like this right now. I guess I'll give it to you while I have it up. Last game, predictably, was Luther Burden, 81%, Lovett, 65. And then we had Bear Bannister and Tusky Dove at 65. Let's go to Tennessee, the more exciting team here. Great team total. The team is 6th in pace, 43.5% pass rate. Hendon Hooker's price stays relatively the same after the inefficient game. He has 355 yards and he averages 281.5 on just 28 attempts through the air. He's a solid play at this price. Played him last week against Georgia. Didn't get there, but you can certainly go back to him this week. Matchup. I'll say Missouri plays good defense, but the team total here is just so high. They're nearly 3 touchdown favorites. You can play Hooker without a doubt. The backfield. Jabari Small got hurt almost right away. We don't know if he's going to play here, but Jalen Wright immediately came in and carried 21 times against Georgia. If Jabari Small is out, Jalen Wright arguably becomes the best running back play on the entire board. They will maybe use Dylan Sampson as a change of pace, but this is definitely a situation to monitor. In a 50-50 timeshare, they're both just GPP viable. Generally speaking, it's Small leading like a 60-40 committee, but if Small is out, Wright's going to have a lot of upside here. Receiving game, they've trimmed the fat off everything too. When games are competitive, it's just Jalen Hyatt, Brew McCoy, Cedric Tillman. Nearly 100% of the routes for all of them. On the year, Hyatt has the most targets. That's because of the Tillman injury. I think that's going to remain the case. Tentatively, I'm expecting this to be very close. Like 1A Hyatt, 1B Tillman, or vice versa. And then Brew McCoy, the 11 targets are a lot, but he's still the least efficient in terms of yards per game. You've got 54 yards per game for McCoy, 66 for Tillman, 108 for Hyatt. In a vacuum, I'd rather play Tillman over McCoy, but honestly, I can't fault you for playing any of the top 3 receivers on this team. They rotate tight ends, so not worth mentioning there. Next game, LSU, Arkansas, 3-point spread. LSU fresh off that Alabama win. Arkansas fresh off a Liberty loss. Well, that's pretty rough. 64 total. Not Auburn. LSU, they're the road favorite here. Don't know why I said Auburn. LSU 54th in pace, 50% pass rate. Jaden Daniels has been excellent this year. He's really mobile. 619 rushing yards on the ground this year. He leads the team. This guy's phenomenal. As a passer, he's been efficient. 221.5 yards per game on 30 attempts. Daniels is certainly viable here. He draws a dream matchup against an Arkansas secondary. While slightly healthier, is still down some key players and has just been absolutely annihilated by opposing passing attacks. So Daniels immediately stands out. Maybe not cash viable, but he's in that conversation and certainly alive for tournaments in this game environment, which is excellent. Pretty easy to stack at this point, too. There's a clear top 2 in Malik Neighbors and Keyshawn Boutte. Right now, their target shares are 19 and 17.5%, but they've been kind of narrowing in on those two. Boutte specifically has at least 7 targets in 3 straight games. Prefer him as a price-adjusted play compared to Neighbors, but it's close. Mason Taylor's their tight end. He's the next most involved player in the offense. And from there, it's kind of a rotation for the ancillary receivers. Last week, Taylor, 69% of the routes. Jerry Jenkins, 53%. Brian Thomas, 47%. That's how I rank them. The running backs, they're fully healthy now, but it doesn't appear like they have much interest in using Armani Goodwin or Noah Cain. It was basically just Josh Williams and John Emery. Josh Williams played a lot more snaps. He had 10 touches in their most recent game. John Emery came in with 8, so it's still fairly close here. Arkansas can be had on the ground too, so maybe these guys are worth a GPP dart throw here or there. For me, it's Williams. He's just the 1A in the backfield at 4,100. Again, I'd rather play like Schrader and some other cheap backs, but he's at least in the player pool. Arkansas. This team is ranked 16th in pace, 38% pass rate. Really, the whole offense to me hinges on KJ Jefferson's status. He's hurt. He's playing hurt. And if he goes, I would be confident using him. If not, I mean, you're just not going to know this on Friday whenever you watch it Saturday morning. If Jefferson plays, you should have decent confidence he's healthy. If not, I think I'm probably staying away from this because I don't know if they're going to use Malik Hornsby or Fortin. But Jefferson, highly mobile, 425 yards, averaging 247.5 per game through the air in just 28 attempts. He's an awesome price-adjusted play here in this game environment. Arkansas still is at 30 total here. KJ Jefferson, 6,500. I think he's probably in cash, but I would love to get an update on his status throughout the week. Raheem Sanders, not quite that monstrous workload he had earlier in the year. Still touched the ball 20 times last week. 17 touches the week prior, 16 the week before that. So you can clearly see it's not the like 25 touches he was getting per game. Early in the season, they just have a healthy AJ Green. Rashad Dubinian's come along a little bit. Sanders still really active, though. 125 rush yards per game, 22 receiving yards. He's an expensive GPP running back play. In the receiving game, Jaden Hazelwood's the 1, 64.5 yards per game on 6.3 targets. Landers is the 2, 66 yards per game on 5.8 targets. Trey Knox is their tight end. And then Warren Thompson, Keytron Jackson, they round out the wide receiver 3 and 4 position most of the time. Target shares are really split here. It's not like Treylon Burks is walking through the door. We don't have a 30% target share guy. And these guys are expensive. Like Hazelwood is 5,800. You can do better than him unless you're just stacking Arkansas's offense. I'm going to limit Hazelwood, Landers, and Knox to Arkansas stacks. Purdue, Illinois. This game has a 6.5 point spread in favor of Illinois, a 44.5 point total. Purdue, they're the faster team. They're 50th. They have a 60% pass rate going up against an Illinois team that just lost the game last week. And this should be a much better game. Purdue's not in a monsoon or hurricane, tornado, I don't know what you want to call it. They had the high wind game last week. A lot of the Big Ten did, but Purdue drastically affected by that. O'Connell needs a 300-yard bonus to pay off here. He's negative 68 rushing yards. Averages 305 through the air on 45 attempts, which is great, but Illinois' defense is one of the best in the country, only allowing 5.3 yards per pass attempt in their coverage. Purdue's team total is 19, so it seems unlikely O'Connell gets there more times than not. The backfield, it's more of a committee now. You saw Devin Maccabee split time with Dylan Downing. That's going to be an issue moving forward, especially for a team that only runs the ball 40% of the time. Then in the pass game, the only guy with locked-in targets is Charlie Jones. 18 targets last week. Nobody else had more than 4. Holy smokes. Charlie Jones has a 31% target share, averages 105 yards per game on 12.9 targets. He has a 14 target average in his last 4 games. 8,100, probably not expensive enough, but there are at least other options we'll talk about. The wide receiver 2 is most likely Payne Durham, then TJ Sheffield, then maybe Abdur-Rahman Yassin, who's worked ahead of Tyrone Tracy lately. Just to give you guys the routes in case you're looking for an ancillary Purdue option. Last week, Charlie Jones, 91%, Payne Durham, 77%, TJ Sheffield, 68%. Then you go all the way down to Deion Burks, 34%, Abdur-Rahman Yassin, 26%, Tracy, 26%, Mershawn Rice, 21%. Illinois, they rank 93rd in pace, 41% pass rate. Tommy DeVito is a game manager, 78 rush yards, 209 passing yards on 28 attempts. There's better plays than him, price adjusted. Chase Brown, 8,100, finally getting the love he deserves, 148 yards per game on the ground. Also active in the receiving game, Chase Brown averages another 15.7 there on 31.1 touches. He is the best volume, maybe in college football right now. Do you find the salary for him? He's a rock solid price. Adjusted play, good floor, good ceiling for Brown. In the receiving game, this is a neutered offense. They don't throw the ball downfield much, but You have Isaiah Williams leading the pack here with 60 yards per game on 8.3 targets. Pat Bryant's the wide receiver 2, 43.5 yards per game on 4.9 targets. Generally not playing Illinois pass catchers. There's usually better price-adjusted options. Brian Hightower and Casey Washington split the 3. Tip Raymond had 7 targets last week at tight end, but this team uses a rotation at all of the tertiary positions, including tight end. Last week, Tip Raymond, 50% of the routes. That's no different than his season average. Oklahoma, West Virginia, 67.5 total. One of the phenomenal potential shootouts on the board for this week. Right now, West Virginia, 7.5-point home underdog. The total, we just talked about that. It's massive. Oklahoma, 5th in pace, 42% pass rate. Dylan Gabriel averaging 254 pass yards per game on 30 attempts. This is still a fast, explosive offense. Gabriel's somewhat limited by the injury. He only played 1.5 quarters in the TCU games. I mean, these numbers likely look better if you remove that. He does have 250 rushing yards, but we know the ceiling on Gabriel, and now he's 8K. He's not at CJ Stroud's price level. He's not at Bryce Young's price level. He's playable at this price, especially in tournaments, and he's stackable. The issue is there's no consistency here. Marvin Mims plays on every single snap, really, but he doesn't have a good target share. It's just at 24%. He averages 75 yards per game. He should be like a 5.9K receiver, not 7.2. So it's really tough to play him with the alternatives. But if you're specifically stacking this offense, it's going to start with Mims. Second most consistent guy is Braden Willis, their tight end, 38.5 yards per game on 4.3 targets. After that, they benched Julia Farouk, they benched Theo Weiss, and they used Drake Stoops on every single snap. This is not an exaggeration. The routes for Drake Stoops last week were mind-blowing. 100% of the routes. Mims was at 90%. Braden Willis was at 87.5%. And you know, I say they benched Jaleel Farouk. He still had a 67.5% route rate. Theo Weiss has actually been benched. So it's now Marvin Mims 1, Drake Stoops 2, Jaleel Farouk 3 in terms of receivers, with Willis being your every down tight end. Honestly, you're probably just playing Stoops, man. I mean, 4.3K for 100% of the routes. It's crazy. He's not explosive. He's actually pretty bad, but Oklahoma has not been able to figure out their best trio of receivers all year. So if he's going to play, I'm going to play him. Running back, Javonte Barnes looks likely to return here, which is good. Eric Gray's been banged up, so they could use a change of pace to ease him off his 20 touch per game workload. But Gray's actually been pretty good. I can't knock Gray. He deserves to have 20 touches per game at this point. Averaging 100 yards per game. He had 8 targets in their last game. He's averaging 21 receiving yards. Gray's been solid. It's just there's some inherent risk with Barnes coming back and Major also handling 18 carries over the last 2 games. I don't think they want to use Gray in a 20 touch per game workload. They really haven't all year unless it's been needed, which it has been the case the last couple games. But even look, last game where Barnes played, Barnes outcarried Gray 21-19. So they like Barnes. They play Barnes. I think it kind of cannibalizes Gray. West Virginia, they're 56th in pace at 53.5% pass rate. JT Daniels is another one of these pocket passing quarterbacks with negative rushing numbers. He's at negative 37 yards this year, making him dependent on a 300-yard bonus for a ceiling. But instead of like O'Connell, who actually averages over 300 yards per game through the air, JT Daniels averages 226. The only thing working in his favor here is Oklahoma's been bad on defense, and they've been worse against the run, so it doesn't even work in his favor. Daniels has been horribly inefficient. Let's put it this way, a horribly inefficient sack-taking machine who's 6,700. There's flat out no way I'm playing Daniels on this slate at this price. I'd rather play just like Hunter Deckers at 5K or whatever Hunter Deckers is. We'll get to him in a little bit, but there's just flat out better price-adjusted plays than Daniels. I don't know how his price is this high. It has to just be a function of the total of the game being at 67.5. But this backfield looks like it's going to get back some much-needed help in Tony Mathis. In one game earlier this year where CJ Donaldson missed and Justin Johnson was available, the touch count was 22 Mathis, 12 Johnson. So we still had an edge towards Tony Mathis here, who comes back from injury. I think it's probably close to a 50-50 committee. Neither has been great, but it's a good matchup here. Maybe you could throw a dart on Mathis leading the committee in this spot, but I don't feel great about it. CJ Donaldson's out for the rest of the year. They also started using mobile quarterback Garrett Green again. They did this towards the end of last year. And honestly, he must be horrific as a passer if he's not beating out JT Daniels at this point. But I think you start seeing a little more Garrett Green here. making the whole passing receiving game messy for this team. At receiver, the one thing you can bank on is volume. They pass the ball a ton. So you do have a lot of target volume for these guys. Bryce Ford Wheaton's targets have dropped substantially. He has a 9.6 target per game average on the year, and he hasn't seen 9 targets in any of the last 4 games. So just know this is a descending role for Bryce Ford Wheaton, at least on paper. He can rebound at any time, but it doesn't look likely. They've involved Prather more and Sam James, and honestly, Reese Smith. This team, like their coaching staff is playing for their jobs right now. They're likely to get fired at the end of the year. They're experimenting. So last week, they gave Sam James 100% of the routes and Reese Smith 76%. They came at the expense of Caden Prather, who was down at 55%. Like Prather might transfer. They're going to lose him if they keep doing this. He's their best receiver on the year, least most efficient. So even right now, I don't think you feel good about the routes. Like the whole year, Prather had been the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, however you want to characterize them. But then you have a random Reese Smith game where he pops up for 76% of the routes. Yeah, I don't know. It seems more volatile than it's been all year. Ultimately, I'm still going to play Prather. I think you're buying low on the second best player in this offense, maybe 5,400. Sam James is 5,500. You also can't argue with the efficiency. Sam James has over 100 more receiving yards than Prather on 6 fewer targets. So, I mean, this receiving core is messy. I'll probably end up with some of these guys, ranking them for me, price adjusted. It's still going to be Prather 1 based on the targets. Again, this is price adjusted. In a vacuum, BFW is number 1. Then I'll go James, then I'll go Bryce Ford Wheaton, then Reese Smith. Reese Smith is somewhat viable as a GPP option with that increased route share. Their tight end, O'Loughlin, he's out for the year. Notre Dame, Navy, most likely a game you can X out. 16.5 point spread, 40 total. Both teams really slow. Notre Dame's 114th in pace, 38.5% pass rate. Navy's 123rd in pace, and they run the triple option. So 18% pass rate for them. Drew Pine, they just won't throw the ball when they can play from ahead. So Drew Pine has a horrible floor, horrible ceiling. There's really not much to say about Pine. He's just too expensive. He should be the min. Running back, they've kind of phased out Tyree a little bit. He still has had 8 and 7 carries, I should say, over the last 2 games. That's 9 touches exactly in that span. But Audric Estime has 20 and 18 carries. Logan Diggs has 20 and 17 carries. Tyree's more of a change of pace. Estime and Diggs are getting big workloads. Navy's not good anywhere on defense. People will talk about their stuff rate and stuff. They haven't played a good level of competition. I mean, you're talking about like 2-star walk-on caliber guys on their defense facing 5 stars in Notre Dame's offensive line. This team's going to get run all over and lose. So Estime and Diggs are viable in tournaments. The only pass catcher viable is Michael Meyer. He's averaging 70-ish yards per game. He's at 69.3 to be exact on 8.9 targets. They benched Lorenzo Styles for repeated drops. They also benched Braden Lenzy a bit here, so they don't even have a consistent wide receiver 1, 2, or 3. It's Meyer or pass. Navy, you fade the whole team. They're rotating quarterbacks. They're rotating Daba Fofana and Anton Hall at running back, and then they don't throw, so you can't play receivers. Virginia Tech, Duke, you can honestly give Virginia Tech the Navy treatment here. They're 9.5 point underdogs to Duke in the game with a 49 total. Okay, we're not going to quite give them the Navy treatment. They do have a 20 implied team total, but Grant Wells is inept at quarterback. Even the 52% pass rate hasn't helped him. 206 passing yards per game on 31.5 attempts, 190 rushing yards. He's just a low floor, low ceiling combination. At receiver, it's probably Caleb Smith, number 1 for them, 72 yards per game on 6.1 targets, but he's now 5.2K. You got to pay for him. The second guy I'd look to is Dwayne Lofton. He averages 19 yards per game, so it's pretty bad out here. I mean, outside of Caleb Smith, nobody averages more than 32 yards per game. That'd be Daquan Wright. I mean, tough scene. If you want to look at routes, like maybe some of you are considering playing a really cheap Daquan Wright. I don't know if I do that. He had a 22% route rate last week. It's pretty dicey here. The one thing I'll say is they don't have Malachi Thomas right now, so Keyshawn King should handle a pretty good workload. The only problem is he's priced up at 6,300. Like, there's Cody Schrader at 4,500, who I would prefer straight up to Keyshawn King. Not even close, just straight up would rather have Cody Schrader. So it's a Virginia Tech's a mess as usual. Duke is 107th in pace, They rank with a 44.5% pass rate. Now, Riley Leonard, he's the exact opposite. He's been awesome this year. Really solid dual threat. 577 yards on the ground this year. Averages 204 as a passer. That's on just 27 attempts per game, so don't think too much of the low passing volume. This guy gets there every which way. Virginia Tech does play good defense, so it's not a solid matchup for Leonard. And he's also 7,900. So in a game with just a 49.5 total, I'm not sure how much Leonard I want, but he's viable in tournaments. His dual threat skill set gives him a good floor and a good ceiling. In the backfield, I think this goes back to the three-way committee we saw at the beginning of the year. Jalen Coleman hasn't played in 4 games, but he's suited up for their most recent contest, just didn't get on the field. Suggests to me maybe he was a week away. It's a committee regardless. Whether he plays or not, you're going to see Waters and Jock Moore in a split. If Coleman comes back, it's just a 3-way committee rather than 2. At receiver, pretty easy to talk about here. DraftKings continues to call Jalen Moore a quarterback. He's not. He's their receiver number 2. Jalen Calhoun's their wide receiver 1. If you're stacking Duke or any part of this game, he'd be the first pass catcher you look to, even at 5,900. 60 yards per game on 6.5 targets. And then the last thing to mention here, Eli Panko's out for the year. Samir Hagens popped up for a pretty decent game. Almost every single route for Samir Hagens. He's now the locked-in wide receiver 3 opposite Jordan Moore and Jalen Calhoun. SMU USF, the game of the slate, 72.5 total, 17.5 point spread in favor of SMU. Tanner Mordecai, fresh off that historic game against Houston, 7th in pace, 54% pass rate. He's 8,100. He should have CJ Stroud's price. He should have Bryce Young's price. DraftKings made an error. Tanner Mordecai, 8,100. He's probably the first guy in your lineup for cash. 309 yards per game on 37 attempts, 99 rushing yards. No, he's not Michael Vick, but he has positive mobility himself and just a ridiculous, ridiculous floor as a passer. Tanner Mordecai, Rashee Rice stack should be among the most owned on the board. Rashee Rice, their leading receiver, 117 yards per game on 13.6 targets per game. This dude is a monster. Monster. From there, it gets a little dicey. Let's go to the routes because they have so many injuries at receiver. They've already lost Jake Bailey for the year. They've lost Bo Corrales for the year. They just lost their tight end, Ben Redding, for the year. And Ben Redding was in a 50-50 timeshare with RJ Maryland. So now RJ Maryland, who has a 34% route share on the year, he jumped up to 49% last week. That was with Redding still playing about 35% himself. Maryland may have a path to 60, 70% of the routes. He's 3,500. He's the first guy to mention because of that injury. But last week at receiver, you had Rashee Rice, 91% of the routes. Jordan Curley, 81%. Jordan Curley's 4,600. He had 5 targets. He averages 49 yards per game. I think he's viable. And then their next highest receiver was Dylan Goffney, 49%. We've seen him at places this year have big games, but stone minimum for Goffney. I think he's in play, just a little risky. From there, it gets gross. Moochie Dixon, 49%. Or excuse me, sorry. That was RJ Maryland's number. Moochie Dixon, Calvante Dixon on this sheet. That's his nickname, Moochie. 21% of the routes. You had Austin Upshaw, 16%. You had Roderick Daniels, 37%. So to recap that in order, it's Rashee Rice, 91%. Moochie Dixon, 21%. RJ Maryland, 49% with upside because of the injury. Jordan Curley, 81. Austin Upshaw, 16. Ben Redding, out now. Don't worry about him. Goffney, 49%. Roderick Daniels, 37. Hope that helps. The backfield, holy smokes. I don't know who plays when, what injuries. They have 5 guys they've used in a bell cow role this year. Trey Siggers hasn't played in 4 games. Velton Gardner goes from 18 carries to 8 in their last game. Tyler Levine goes from 7 to 17 to 25. He looks like their tentative bell cow, assuming Siggers misses, assuming McDaniel is hurt, and assuming Kamar Wheaton is hurt. Wow, I don't know what to do with this backfield. It's Levine or pass unless Siggers returns. If Siggers returns, I would expect him to be the lead back, but holy smokes, this is just a complete 5-sided dice. Roll it and hope you land on the right guy. And we want to. USF allows 6.3 yards per carry, but man, dart throw Levine maybe, but holy smokes, this is volatile. On the other side, USF, 106th in pace, 44.5% pass rate. Jerry Bohannon's out for the year, so Katravis Marsh has stepped up. He's been lackluster as game manager to start the year, 19 rushing yards. He's only passed for more than 200 yards once this year, but he only has 2 starts, so it's not taking too much from him. SMU does allow 8.2 yards per pass attempt, but this team doesn't have a lot of viability. I mean, Marsh at 5K, you're kind of just banking on an unknown asset right now. I think we can find more secure options, but I also don't want to rule Marsh out of tournaments because SMU's defense hasn't been great. We haven't seen a lot of Marsh, so maybe he's great, but is very uncertain. At running back, Brian Batty is their lead back. Behind him, we have Michael Dukes. We have Kelly Joyner back from injury. This is all predicated on the Jaron Manghin injury, who hasn't played in 4 straight games. I don't think we've seen Manghin, so we should expect Brian Batty to be the lead back here. 81 yards per game on 14.2 touches. That's solid for him. He has a good pass catching role too. 7.5% target share is actually pretty good for a back. Among the receivers, Xavier Weaver is the 182 yards per game, 10.3 targets. Weaver, he is a solid price here at 5,900. Like for reference, he's on a worse offense for sure, but he has a better role than Marvin Mims. So it's like you're trying to balance these. Do I take the locked in targets, the inefficient targets with Weaver? Do I take the really efficient but volatile targets with Mims? That's what you're juggling on this slate. Outside of him, I don't know if you really want to get to any of these guys being super volatile. I guess you could play some cheap ones. As far as the routes go, again, it's Weaver 1 clearly. Number 2 is Jimmy Horn. He has a 65% route rate this year. And then Yusuf Terry should be the 3. He's been hurt a lot of the year, but when he's active, he's well above 70% of the routes pretty consistently. So you can throw some really cheap darts here. Like Yusuf Terry is just a stone min punt option, attachment to an awesome offense. I think I'd rather pay for him at his price than play Horn at his at 5,100. Louisville, Clemson, somewhat ugly game here. 52 total. Clemson, the 7-point favorite, coming off their loss to Notre Dame. They've played decent defense this year, but they played really bad teams. They've been absolutely exposed every time they've stepped up in competition. Wake, Notre Dame just demolished them. So I don't know how good their defense actually is. Unfortunately for Louisville, they only have one good player on offense. That's Malik Cunningham. 62nd in pace, 42.5% pass rate. Cunningham is an elite dual threat, 536 yards on the ground. He averages 185 per game through the air on 25 attempts. Just he lost all his good pass catchers last year, a lot of the premier options on offense, and he's been asked to do it himself. And his efficiency has taken a step back. His completion percentage is down. His yards per attempt are down. He's 7,600 here, which is fine. I think there's better price adjusted options. Like I'd rather just find the 600, 500, whatever it is for Mordecai. But I don't want to X out Cunningham from tournaments because of that elite slate breaking mobility. The backfield's a 3-way committee. Trevion Cooley should be back this week, but Jawar Jordan, Tyon Evans, this is ebbs and flows week to week. Clemson allows 3.5 yards per attempt. Plus, Malik Cunningham so involved on the ground. Receiving game, Tyler Hudson leads the way with 78 yards per game on 7.8 targets per game. He's 7,100. I think we could find better price-adjusted plays than this low-volume passing attack, but he has a locked-in target share, so, I mean, he's still the one here. The 2 is questionable. Amari Huggins-Bruce has missed time recently. His routes were way down last game, so I think he plays here, but I'm still a little weary of Amari Huggins-Bruce because I think he's dealing with a lingering injury. Last week, 33% of the routes. For reference, Braden Smith was at 74%. Marshawn Ford, their tight end, he's about 70% consistently. Honestly, I think the only playable guys here are Braden Smith, Marshawn Ford, and Tyler Hudson. Luckily, Braden Smith, 3,600. That is semi-viable. For Clemson, oh man, I got thoughts here. 58th in pace, 46.5% pass rate. They're playing Uiagalelei. They're playing Klubnik at the whims of the coaching staff, not based on playing time, not based on merit, not based on how the game is going. Uiagalelei last week has a solid drive, gets pulled immediately. The OC for this team is getting fired at the end of the year. You're going to see both quarterbacks probably because they can't figure out how to use their playmakers efficiently. Don't expect much from Clemson. They're GPP-based plays that are really uncertain because I think you see both quarterbacks moving forward. Running back, Will Shipley leads a committee that also features Phil Maffa, and they expect to get Kobe Pace back this week dealing with an ankle injury. For Will Shipley to have 18 touches against Notre Dame is criminal last week. So just know they're not using their best player to the degree they should. Bo Collins went down, which should solidify some targets for Joseph Nada, Antonio Williams, probably tight end Davis Allen too. But I mean, nobody on this team averages more than 43 yards per game. That's their freshman Antonio Williams, and he doesn't even lead the team in targets. So you can clearly see this coaching staff has problems getting their best players the ball, figuring out who their most talented players are, and then using them effectively. And Louisville's defense is a great pass rush. So for whoever is under center for Clemson, they're going to be under duress. Tough game to target. As you can see, I am not a fan of how Clemson is handling their team. A couple games left here. Let's go to Nebraska, Michigan. 48.5 total, 29.5 point spread. Nebraska's team total is below 9. Casey Thompson's hurt. They split time between Chuba Purdy and Logan Smothers. Both are awful. Their backfield, it is still Anthony Grant in a bell cow role. He had 22 touches last week. It probably is going to be the same here, just that Michigan allows 2.6 yards per attempt. So I don't think you want to play him. And then Trey Palmer, he still has amazing target volume, 9.1 targets per game, 32.5% target share, 91 yards per game. Like, he's solid. It's just, I'm not playing anyone attached to Purdy or Smothers. Again, Casey Thompson expected to miss. Everybody else is inept. Michigan, neutered offense, 126th in pace, 38.5% pass rate. They're still getting it done with that rushing attack. They just don't throw ever. So J.J. McCarthy is a low floor, low ceiling option. He is mobile, 203 yards, but they don't choose to use him as part of the run game most of the time, especially when they can conserve him. They're going to have Ohio State coming up here, so I don't think there's any changes. He's not really playable. Blake Corum is 132 yards per game on 23 attempts. He's flat out awesome. 8,300 still probably not expensive enough. Donovan Edwards, a dynamic change of pace, now back from injury. He's averaging 12 touches per game. Well, he's seen more than that in 3 straight games. Love Edwards, fine change of pace option. The receivers are tough to trust. They pop up for big games here and there. Roman Wilson's been injured, but he expects to return. That should put him in his wide receiver 3 role again. Cornelius Johnson's the 2, Ronnie Bell's the 1, Luke Schoonmaker's the tight end. Schoonmaker's the best price-adjusted option of this group. Bama, Ole Miss, fun game on paper. 64 total, excuse the 65-64 split at the top. I'll fix that. It is 65. Sometimes these don't populate correctly, so you've seen this before. I apologize. I'll fix it. Alabama, 51st in pace, 52% pass rate. Bryce Young is priced above Tanner Mordecai, and he should not be. Flat out. Ever. Again, on any slate this year. He's averaging 279 through the air. That's worse than Mordecai. 147 rushing yards. That's slightly more than Mordecai, but half of that came on one run, a broken play earlier in the season. He's done nothing since on the ground. Bryce Young is fine for stacks. I mean, the team total for this team is elite. Bryce Young clearly has talent. He's just same thing as Clemson. They can't figure out who their playmakers are, and they can't figure out how to use them. In an overtime loss to LSU, Jahmyr Gibbs had 15 carries. Now, he also had 11 targets, which is awesome. He deserves that. But you also have Jahmyr Gibbs leading your team in targets. That is not the sign of a functioning offense. It just cannot be. You need receivers to step up, and Alabama does not have any good receivers right now. So Jahmyr Gibbs at 8,700, he's definitely playable. He essentially has as close to a Christian McCaffrey role in college football as you can have through the air. He's averaging 6.8 targets per game in the last 4, but he's asked to do it all, which hasn't worked for Alabama. In the pass game, they are still searching for their number 1 receiver. Ja'Cory Brooks, he had a 100% route rate last week. That's good. He if you look at the efficiency metrics, he's been their best receiver. Yards per route run, it is Brooks. So we got to give them credit for finally getting him on the field, getting him 15 targets. If you stack Young, it's with Brooks, I think. From there, here are the routes. Kobe Prentice, 16%. Good. He's been bad. Get him off the field. Cameron Latou, 89%. He's a tight end, so he's giving you more solid floor, low ceiling. But Alabama scores a lot of touchdowns, so I don't want to say Latou doesn't have a ceiling. He's a solid price-adjusted play here. Jermaine Burton, 62% of the routes. This is the one I can't stomach. He's been among their worst receivers, yards per route run. He's a wind sprinter on the field. Just awful player. Trayshawn Holden didn't even see a target last week. His routes have been cut. Isaiah Bond, 44% of the routes. And JoJo Earl, 67% of the routes. That's probably fine. We haven't seen a lot of Earl this year, so at least the sample's small, and you could talk me into him being a good starter. But Holden, Prentice, these guys need to be off the field. Same with our buddy Jermaine Burton. Needs to be off the field. Anyway, for DFS, it's 1, Ja'Cory Brooks, 2, Cameron Latou, 3, JoJo Earl. Ole Miss, 3rd in pace, 35% pass rate. Jackson Dart, he's kind of like fancy J.J. McCarthy in a way. He's way more mobile, 473 rushing yards for him, 213 pass yards per game is pretty good. That's just on 24 attempts as well. So Dart, he's been erratic. Like, his accuracy numbers aren't good, but he does have some pretty solid DFS production, mainly because of his legs. but he's still nothing more than a tournament play in this matchup. In the backfield, Quinshon Judkins is playing ahead of Evans. I think it's partially injury related. They like a 50-50 committee, but Judkins, their freshman, he has been so good. 115 yards on the ground per game for Judkins on 21 carries. He had 32 carries in their last game. This dude is a monster, and we've got him in the SEC presumably for 3 more years. Holy smokes. Even in this matchup, Judkins deserves consideration. Evans would be a GPP-based play, assuming he's healthier. At receiver, they don't rotate at all. Jonathan Mingo, Malik Heath, and Jordan Watkins, they're just a low-volume pass attack, so they kind of need to be coaxed into higher output game environments for the pass. They're all sort of a little bit too expensive for their roles, but if you're ranking them, it's Mingo 1, Heath 2, Watkins 3. 74 yards per game for Mingo, 55 for Heath, and 38 for Watkins. They also did not use a tight end last week, which was interesting. Dayton Wade, almost every single snap, they took Casey Kelly off the field. If you remember, they lost Michael Trigg earlier this year, so this could continue. Dayton Wade is really cheap. He had a 100% route rate in their last game. So something to mention, 7 targets as well. I don't know. You could do worse than Dayton Wade at 3,500. Maryland, Penn State, 10-point spread, 59 total here. Maryland's much slower, much run heavier than normal, and that's still saying a lot because they're 80th in pace and 51% pass rate. They got back Tagovailoa last week, did not reach 100 yards passing, but he was also in that, really the entire Big Ten affected by the weather, so I wouldn't put too much into it. He's still averaging 259 yards per game on 32.5 attempts. He doesn't run, so it's still a lower floor, lower ceiling combo than last year. Tough to trust him right now at 6,600, but you could play him. They also face a tough Penn State secondary, so I don't know. There's kind of some ebbs and flows here. Backfield, Roman Hemby leads a committee that also features Antwain Littleton, who's been banged up, and Ramon Brown. Don't trust his 24 and 16 carries in back-to-back games. We've seen this where it'll drop to single digits. It's going to be a 3-way committee. They also lost Rakeem Jarrett to injury. He is questionable for this game. He's their only player with a locked-in route rate, so that is significant here. He hasn't been very good, so I don't know if I want to play any of these guys to begin with. But let's go to the Maryland routes. You decide for yourself because it is just split nasty here. Jarrett, he got hurt, but his route rate on the year is 66%. Jayshon Jones, 60%. Corey Dykes, 52%. Dante Demas, 55%. Jacob Copeland, 37%. CJ Dippre, their tight end, 239. Ty Felton, 46. Even Octavian Smith has a 14% route rate. With Jarrett getting hurt last week, that jumped to 48%. Yeah, I don't know. Get your 6-way dice out, roll it, and see who you land on. That's your stack with Tagovailoa. I prefer Jones and Jarrett for what it's worth, which isn't much. Penn State, 52% pass rate, 52 in pace. They're ranked 52nd. Better way to say that. It's been a long show. When you talk to yourself for 45 minutes, sometimes you say things like that. But 49% pass rate for Penn State. Their season's lost. Every single important game they've played, they've lost. So they've now done valuation mode. Sean Clifford splitting time with Drew Lar. Until one of them gets all the snaps, you can't play them. They also continue to use Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in a 50-50 committee, despite Singleton being more efficient. In this game, as massive favorites, not massive, 10-point favorites against the Maryland run defense, it's pretty good, I guess. I mean, there is upside for 17 carries. You could use Singleton as a GPP play at 5,100. He's not too different than Schrader. You're giving up a little bit of opportunity for what could be more efficiency. I don't hate Singleton. He's just not a good play. He's not bad either. Their receivers, Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley. Unfortunately, this team will go really run heavy when they're winning games. They're one of the most sensitive teams to game script in the country. But maybe that doesn't happen. If they're evaluating Drew Lar, they're going to be throwing with him, seeing what he has. So Parker Washington's the 1, Tinsley's the 2. From there, it's nasty. Keandre Lambert-Smith got hurt at the midpoint of the year. His routes have plummeted. He's split with Harrison Wallace. They've also used 12 personnel at an exceedingly high rate. Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson all involved there. Iowa State, Oklahoma State, 48.5 total, 1.5-point spread in favor of Iowa State. Hunter Deckers is interesting. 75th in pace, 58.5% pass rate. Deckers is getting better, first of all. He averages 39.5 pass attempts per game, 263 yards per game. He's not negative in terms of rushing yards, 53 rush yards on the year. At his price, he's somewhat interesting. Oklahoma State has a terrible defense. especially against the pass. So it's open for him. I don't hate Deckers. He also has a target magnet in Xavier Hutchinson, 8,300, 106 yards per game on 14 targets per game. He's maybe the best expensive receiver to get to. They also use Jalen Noel and Dimitri Stanley on almost every single play. So Dimitri Stanley, he's averaging 6 targets per game in the last 4. That 3,800, that'll play. Noel is averaging 7.8 at 4,900. That'll also play. The backfield, Jarrell Brock got injured. They did not play Eli Sanders a snap. And then Deion Silas was outcarried 18-6 by their freshman Cartevious Norton. Norton had 7 targets in the game. That is 25 touches. He might just be a guy they're evaluating for the future. I would be somewhat skeptical, especially if Brock plays, because they've used the committee all season long. But that's a really healthy workload for Cartevious Norton at 3,900. He is viable against an Oklahoma State defense allowing 4.9 yards per carry. The Oklahoma State side comes down to Spencer Sanders. This team will be fast and pass heavy if he plays. I've heard rumors he's out for the year, which is an issue. But when he plays, 343 yards on the ground, 272 through the air. If he doesn't play, Garrett Rangel is going to start. It's a bit expensive for a freshman. I believe he's a freshman, making his second start here. He backdoored his way into a 300-yard game in his first start, and that's probably going to happen because their defense is so bad. But you're also paying for it, and you're paying for uncertainty here too. He could just be bad. The efficiency stats weren't good for him, but the volume was. So we'll see. I prefer to hold out and play some other more experienced players at cheaper prices than go up and play the inexperienced Rangel, but we'll find out. We saw Dominic Richardson return to their last game. He's splitting time now. It's just not the 20-touch workload we saw early in the year. He had 14 carries, which is good, but we saw DeAndre Jackson with 5. Ali, Gordon, and Jaden Nixon popped up here and there. Richardson's a dicey play. It's a tough matchup for him. Iowa State plays good run defense, 3.3 yards per carry. Probably not getting to him. Oh, one last thing on the running game for quarterbacks. Garrett Rangel did have 7 designed attempts, which is good. So, I mean, the floor should be pretty good for Rangel. The pass game, Braden Johnson missed his 3rd straight game. Jaden Bray has only appeared in 1 game. They were both out. I have no idea if they play. This is a tight-lipped program. You're just not going to know. From there, I'll read you the routes because I think they're pretty telling. Braden Johnson's the one when healthy, allegedly. And then we had Bryson Green, 94% or higher each of the last 4 games. He's been above 90% in 6 straight, so I think he's locked in. John Paul Richardson's been banged up, so his routes were at 67% last week. Brennan Presley at 72%. And then, interestingly, they cut the routes for their freshman, Stephon Johnson. He dropped from 83 to 24%. That's with Langston Anderson coming in and playing 74%. So I think if they get either Jaden Bray or Braden Johnson healthy, they immediately play over Stephon Johnson and Langston Anderson. If they're all still hurt, I would play Langston Anderson over Stephon Johnson right now. Close this out. We have a mystery game because I forgot to label it. I know what it is. All right, I'll label it after the fact. Sorry about this, too, guys. 2 errors and not too bad for me today. UCF Tulane, 2-point spread, 1.5 in some spots in favor of Tulane, the home team, 54 total here. UCF is fast, 49th in pace, 42% pass rate. Tulane almost the same. They're 86th in pace. They also have a 42% pass rate. John Maurice Plumlee is going to play here. He was suited up in their last game, but their coaching staff indicated he did not practice till very late in the week, so they just felt more comfortable going with Keene. We saw a lot of Keene last year. He was awful. He's actually played really well this year to start the year, especially as a passer. And their coach hinted at using 2 guys, so I'm a little hesitant to play either here, especially against a solid Tulane defense. We know Plumlee, he has the elite mobility, 532 yards on the ground this year. He's missed a whole game and part of another one. Keene's more of a pocket passer. I tend to lean on the efficiency we saw last year with Keene. I don't think he night and day turned into a stud pocket passer, but I guess we'll find out. The risk is that both of them play, and that seems somewhat likely. Backfield's also a split here. It's moving away from Bowser slowly. They still love to use his 3.3 yards per carry and slam him back into the offensive line 15 times a game, especially when RJ Harvey's averaging 7 yards per carry. But I think when the going gets tough, the team should, even if they have a poor analytics program, you should see RJ Harvey's way better than Isaiah Bowser. So Harvey at 5,400, he's live in tournaments. In the receiving game, I don't know how hurt Javon Baker still is. He was the wide receiver 1 to start the year, but his targets and efficiency has taken a step back. O'Keefe has 8 carries in the last 2 games. O'Keefe has 23 targets in the last 2 games. He's now averaging more yards per game than Baker. So I think O'Keefe is clearly the one now. I would still go to Baker as the 2. Baker's played ahead of Kobe Hudson all year long, and Hudson's targets recently are bolstered by that Baker injury. So I think I'm still going to Baker over Hudson, but it's risky. These guys are all tight in price. Don't hate playing any of the 3. Would like it if Keene started above Plumlee for them. But I mean, Plumlee has good efficiency numbers as a passer too. He's just erratic and has a lot of turnovers. Tulane, you've got Michael Pratt as a dual threat running sort of a slower run-heavy offense, but he has 251 rushing yards this year. He averages 230 per game as a passer, and it's been up and down for him. You've got games below 200. He has 3 games above 300. So Pratt, he's kind of a low ceiling, high floor option. Because he's super efficient, it all comes down to the offense. Does he see the pass attempts in that given week? So you could play Pratt. He's not expensive. He's just a little volatile. Tajay Spears, Iverson Celestine, Shady Clayton. It looked like more of a timeshare last week than previously, but just know that most of Celestine and Clayton's carries came in the second half. Spears dominated first half work. So I think Spears is still tentatively leading the backfield. I would still project him for around 20 touches in this game, especially when the chips are down. They need to win. This is for the conference almost. Big time game here. I think Spears still has that workload. I'm not too worried about what happened last week with the timeshare. It was a game script thing, I think. In the receiving game, they rotate 5 guys, but it's somewhat condensed. It's Day-Day McDougal, Deuce Watts, Shea Wyatt, Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, Tyreek James, their tight end. Those are the guys receiving the work. I'll give you the routes before we head out, but it is not real pretty for Tulane. Last game, 42% McDougal, 67% Watts. That's where I would go if I'm playing one of them. Shea Wyatt, 58%. Lawrence Keys, 33. Jaquan Jackson, 33. Tyreek James, their tight end, 86. Now, his route rate on the year is 48%, so that 86 is an anomaly, but it is what it is. 7 targets for Tyreek. And then Tajay Spears, the last one, he's always on the field, so he's solid. But that'll do it for the slate. Thank you for the mishaps when they occurred, guys. But we got it in under an hour. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the matchups, who you guys like on the slate. I want to hear it. I'll get back to you in the comment section. You can also reach out on Twitter if you'd like. I'm at Matt_Kajeski. Otherwise, hit the thumbs up button on the way out. Subscribe to the channel. It helps a ton, and thank you if you've already done that. Otherwise, we'll see you guys again next week. We're getting towards the end of the year, but I'm still having a ton of fun doing the breakdowns. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you guys again next time.